Good morning, boys and girls. It's Friday. We're ending another chapter. Let's think about what happened yesterday. We went to the new house with Erith and saw the salt lick, which Erith has his eyes on. But chapter 15 begins alone again. Erith moaned softly. "Isn't that the most luscious thing in the whole world?" he asked, gazing at the salt lick. Poppy, whose eyes were fixed on the enormous owl, could hardly speak. "It's awful," she barely squeaked. Erith turned to her. "What are you saying?" he demanded. "Look," Poppy cried, trembling as she pointed to the owl on the barn. Erith turned and looked. "Never noticed that before," he grunted. In wonder, Poppy murmured, "Mr. Okax is only half that size." Erith shrugged, then went back to gazing at the salt. "Well, girl," he said, "have you figured out how you're going to get that salt for me?" Poppy, still in a state of shock, managed only to shake her head. Erith took one last loving look at the salt and turned. "You know where to find me," he said. "Don't let me down." With that, he began to waddle away. "Erith!" Poppy cried, her fearful trance broken. "Wait!" The porcupine peered around peevishly. "What now?" he grumbled. "You aren't just leaving me here, are you?" "What else am I supposed to do?" "Help me," Poppy said in a small voice. "Poppy, we made a deal. I'd get you here. You'd get me that salt. I've done my part. Now you do yours." "But—" "No buts," Erith snapped, lashing his tail in erection. Poppy backed away. "I'm going home now, but I'll be waiting." With a final glare, he said, "Keep your promise, furball," and marched off. Poppy started to run after him, but tripped on something and fell flat. When she got up, Erith had disappeared among the corn. And unhappy, Poppy dusted herself off. It was then that she noted what had tripped her. It was one of Erith's tail quills. When he'd flounced his tail, it had fallen out. Poppy picked the quill up gingerly. She'd never really looked at one closely before. It was mostly black and made of long fused hairs, just as Erith had said. One end was blunt, the other end, the sharp end, was ivory white. With fascination, Poppy examined the tiny barbs. The point, which she was able to resist touching, was frightfully sharp. She was about to toss the quill away when she had an idea. Grasping it by its blunt end, she swished it about a few times. It moved nicely, like a sword. Poppy found a tall blade of grass, plucked it, and tied it around her waist in sash-like fashion. With care, she slid the quill under her belt. It fit comfortably. Then she drew the quill out a few times to see if it came freely. Though a single quill was not the full arsenal that Erith carried, it was something. She only hoped she never had to use it. Reluctantly, Poppy turned her attention back to the enormous owl on the barn. The bird had not moved, but was still sitting on its perch. Gazing off into the distance with huge eyes, Poppy was relieved it had not turned her way. The realization that at any moment the owl might turn and discover her made Poppy retreat into the corn, but not so far that she'd be unable to peer out. Once hidden, she tried to make sense of her situation. And here is Poppy with her newfound sword and checking it out and examining it. And we're going to go back to the front of the book again. Not only does Poppy have her earring on, but if you notice, she is holding her porcupine quill or sword in her hand. And look real close, she has that blade of grass tucked around her waist. She kind of looks like a ninja warrior mouse, maybe we'll call her. It was all very well to have reached Newhouse, but now that she'd arrived, she still had no real clue to why Mr. Oakax would not permit them to move here. All she had seen was the huge owl. Could this reason have something to do with that? Poppy tried to think it through. An owl of this size would be ferocious. Perhaps Mr. Oakax was worried that this bird would steal his food. It certainly would eat a lot. The truth was, and Poppy forced herself to acknowledge it, this huge owl made moving here impossible. Mr. Oakax was bad enough. This owl looked twice as bad. Then Poppy had a new thought. What if Mr. Oakax really was trying to protect her family? Had she been wrong about him all along? But then perhaps this owl was not really living here at Newhouse. Simply because she was seeing it now proved nothing. It could be passing through, perhaps just spending the night. The sun was up now. Poppy decided she had best settle in and wait to see what, if anything, happened. Well, the owl. What do you think about the owl? Twice Mr. Oakax's size. Do you think it has anything to do with the reason why he doesn't want the mice to move to Newhouse? Chapter 16. The truth at last. Well, we can all make a prediction with this one. We're going to find out what's really going on. It was some time before she sensed movement in the house. It appeared as vague forms stirring behind second-floor lace curtains, then shifted to the windows below. The front door opened. A tomcat poked his head out. He looked around, stepped outside. The door shut behind him. He was a large, bony orange cat with the pinched body of advanced age. One ear was bent. He walked slowly, limping slightly, glancing up at the sun as if to measure its warmth, but by keeping his tail high, he maintained a stately dignity. Poppy held her breath. Surely this huge owl would notice the cat and realize the old beast had little fight in him and less speed. It would be no trouble at all for the owl to snatch him up. Nonetheless, the cat continued to saunter casually toward the barn. He stopped once, then twice, to scratch himself stiffly under his chin. When he reached the barn, he sat directly below the owl. Squinting, he looked into the sun, then lay down and closed his eyes. Through all of this, the owl did nothing. It made no sense. But Poppy kept watching. The cat slept. The owl remained motionless. The field of corn rustled. Once again, the house door opened. This time, a human emerged, a boy. In his hand, he held a long stick with a string and a small hook attached to it. Momentarily, he stood on the threshold of the door, apparently listening to something being said from within. He nodded and shut the door. Then he started off on the same path the cat had taken, toward the barn. Poppy, who had never seen a real person, watched with fascination. Surely, she thought, the owl would fly away the instant it saw this human coming. Big as the owl was, the boy was much bigger. But though the boy drew nearer and nearer, the owl remained motionless, its eyes fixed on something distant. The boy reached the cat, bent over, and patted it. The cat flipped his tail but continued to sleep. Then the boy looked up at the owl. He showed nor the slightest surprise to see it there. Instead, he put down his stick and went inside the barn. With the barn door open, a few chickens strutted out, clucking and pecking the ground. They paid no mind to the cat or the owl, nor did the owl consider them. Poppy was completely baffled. What could the owl be looking at that so held its attention? The next moment, she was even more startled to see the upper barn window open, the window right next to where the owl was roosting. It was the boy who opened it. Even so, the owl did not budge. More amazing, the boy reached out, placed his hand on the owl, and turned it about so that it now faced in a new direction. Never had Poppy been more astonished. Could it be that huge owl was not real? It was only a fake? It certainly seemed so, but after all, she had made but one observation. What she needed was proof. To get it, she would have to wait at Newhouse and watch. Poppy stayed on the edge of the cornfield, but her time was not all spent waiting. She was too excited to remain in one place. Instead, she took time to explore the old barn at the other edge of the field by the dirt road and found it a respectable addition to Gray House. As for food, Poppy had never eaten so well. There was enough in this cornfield to feed her family. In fact, all of them could move here. During her hours of watching, Poppy met with no other small animals. At first, she was perplexed. Then she decided it was because the fake owl was successful. It had frightened everybody away. Not that Poppy put aside her porcupine quill sword. She remained sufficiently wary to keep the sword at her side. Once she almost used it. At midday, she was trying to take a needed nap when she suddenly heard something coming through the corn behind her. Taken by surprise, she leaped up, darted behind a cornstalk, and drew the quill, ready to defend herself. It was a family of deer, a doe and 2 young fawns. Though to Poppy, even the little ones seemed enormously tall. Even so, they had not the slightest interest in her. Instead, the animals treaded their way through the corn and approached the salt lick cautiously. With the mother standing guard, the fawns took a few delicious licks of salt until, at a silent signal, they all bounded away. As Poppy tucked the quill back under her sash, it occurred to her that she might enlist the deer's help in bringing the salt to Erith. But from the way they had enjoyed themselves, it did not seem likely that they would be willing to take the salt to the porcupine. No, she would have to find another way to make good her promise. Besides, the question about the barn owl were more pressing. As far as Poppy could tell, it had yet to move on its own. Though Poppy was fairly sure it was a fake, she had to be positive. That afternoon, Poppy thought of a way of getting proof. The old cat was still stretched out where he had begun the day. The more Poppy observed the cat, the more certain she was that it was too old to be dangerous. She decided to ask him about the owl. The notion made her a little nervous, but she convinced herself that keeping her quill sword at the ready would be enough protection. With considerable care, she crept out of the cornfield, all the while eyeing the barn owl, just in case. It had not moved. At last, she was standing before the sleeping cat, close enough to feel the wash and smell of his fish-scented breath. He was snoring, gripping her quill tightly, but using her friendliest voice. Poppy shouted, "Hello!" The cat opened one eye. "Hi there," the cat murmured. Although he had now opened both eyes, he did not move. "My name is Poppy." The cat sneezed delicately. "Bless you," Poppy said. "Thanks," returned the cat. "They call me George." Poppy nodded. "Nice place you have, George." "Pleasant enough," George replied. "Ah, well, that owl sure keeps things quiet around here," Poppy offered. "Owl?" "The one up on the barn." "Oh, right, the fake one," said George. "Does the job," he said. "What job?" Poppy asked carefully while trying to contain her mounting excitement. "Keeps everybody away, even other owls." "How do you know?" "About 2 weeks ago, the people here put in some chickens. First day, some big old horned owl snatched himself one. Next day, the people put up that fake owl. About 2 days later, I was watching. The real owl came back for another chicken. I saw him dive. Saw him catch sight of that fake owl." "What happened?" Poppy asked. Then she held her breath. "The owl put on his air brakes so fast he flipped right over himself. Must have been scared silly," the cat said with a mostly toothless grin. "Funniest thing I've ever seen. And I'll tell you, that was the last time I've seen that owl around here." The cat closed his eye. Mighty funny, he murmured. Poppy could hardly keep from grinning. Nice talking to you, George, she said. Have a nice day, the old cat sighed and resumed his snoring. Poppy all but skipped back to the cornfield. Despite her excitement in proving the barn owl was fake, she made herself settle down and think things through carefully. The owl was fake, but Mr. Oacax believed it was real. Afraid of an image of himself, he was probably fearful that he would no longer be the one to rule over the mice. That was a lie. Just as it was a lie that he was protecting the mice from porcupines, whom he actually feared himself. In fact, the owl was full of fears. Suddenly, a whole new idea burst upon Poppy. Was it possible that Mr. Oacax's claim that he was protecting mice was merely his way of getting to eat them? The notion was astounding, but the more Poppy thought about it, the more it seemed to be so. It certainly explained things. That is, Mr. Oacax's refusal to give permission for the mice to move to Newhouse had nothing to do with what she and Ragweed had done. He had refused because he did not want the mice to know how fearful he was of losing his dinners. But if that was true, then the mice could come to Newhouse whether Mr. Oacax liked it or not. It was not for Mr. Oacax to decide where they lived, but for the mice themselves. And so, irony, if the family moved to Newhouse, the fake owl would protect them. Poppy was so sure she had found the truth that she stood up on her hind legs, leaped into the air, and kicked her heels twice. When she landed, she collapsed into a soft heap and allowed herself a great sigh of contentment. With that, she closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. What a day. As Poppy slept, Mr. Oacax flew in to settle on a branch along the edge of Dimwood. From deep within the foliage, he stared furiously at the owl on the barn. And there's Poppy finally getting a nice long rest with her wonderful news that she thought she had settled and finally figured out what the mystery was of Newhouse. And so, predictions, yes, she'll be able to go back and tell her family the wonderful news. But she has one more thing to think about. You have to think, do you remember the promise she made? And how is she going to fulfill her promise? Hopefully, we'll find out next week, and we'll continue reading. I hope you have a nice weekend, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.